Hello and welcome to June's ABSA Business Day Supplier Development Dialogues. I'm Joanne Joseph. Thank you for being with us today as we pay tribute to the companies that are really working hard to use supplier development as a means to build successful, sustainable supply chains. Now, these awards were created to promote supplier development and skills transfer throughout the sector. They're also a means to encourage industry collaboration and set the bar high, benchmarking supplier development good practice. You can join this growing network of companies and contribute to a sustainable economy through supplier development. Just go to www.sdawards.co.za. Give that to you again, sdawards.co.za. Well, we're into our fourth monthly program of this nature, building on the previous themes. Can't believe we're here already. But the elephant in the room this time is undoubtedly youth unemployment, at a time when we should be focused on the upliftment of our young people. In June, we're meant to be celebrating our youth and their future potential, but we're instead poring over this crisis. In Africa, youth unemployment averages between 45 and 60% of the total unemployed workforce. In South Africa, the expanded definition of youth unemployment for the age group 18 to 24 years is 74%. Those are the latest stats. For those in the 25 to 34 age bracket, joblessness sits at 51%. Let's break that down further in terms of what is required to reverse these shocking statistics. To create the 8 million new jobs we require, we need to generate, wait for it, 22,220 new jobs every day for 1 year, or 2,000 new SMEs that employ 10 people each every single day. So a few obvious questions arise. What is being done so far, and is it adequate? But more importantly, what can we do differently in the future to make a dent in these frightening numbers? I'm going to put some of these questions to the panel joining me today. And before I get there, let me just remind you that we have a live chat today, which is really a fantastic facility because you can devise your own questions and you can put them to the panel via me. And the way you do that is you type them up, you tell me which panelist you would like to ask that question to, and I in turn put your questions to the panel. So please do make use of that live chat today. Let me introduce you to our guests. In studio with me is Panellists Mavunza, who's Supplier Diversity Champion at ABSA Group Procurement, and Trudy Mganzi is MD of Ambesha Africa. Welcome to both of you. Joining us remotely this morning, Farai Mubawia is Partner Management Lead at Yes for Youth. You'll see there Henry Mates, who's also Social Impact Manager at the V&A Waterfront, while Matebes Vobo is Executive of Enterprise and Supplier Development at Telkom. And Kino Kamis should be a familiar face to you, Director of Tsiba and founder of Kino Kamis Innovations, a media personality. Pretty big panel today. Thank you to each of you rather, for joining us today. Well, I think many of us are pretty rattled by the latest unemployment figures that we're seeing in the market right now. And Kanelani, this must really bother you both as a young person and someone who's dealing with the impact of this on a daily basis.
Thank you, Joanna, and greetings to the audience across Africa. It's a very distressing number to really digest. As a young person in South Africa right now, I really fear for my country. I fear for my continent. I fear for generations to come. When you look at this from a business perspective, as someone who's in the banking sector, the question for us is who's going to consume our product and services in the future? There is a lot of talk about millennium banking in the industry. Yet we see that a growing number of young people that particularly are in this segment are uneducated, they are unemployed. In some ways, they are considered even unemployable. Then the question arises for us as young people to say, what are we going to do different to change this narrative? I think if one were to put it in one sentence, the theme, the title, Cry Our Beloved Country, is perhaps appropriate at this point in time. Speaking to the youth in particular, there's really two issues that I'm really passionate about when it comes to this question of unemployment. The first question is, how do we nurture youth entrepreneurship? Foremost in my mind, it's how do we actually get entrepreneurship in the minds of the youth earlier or even sooner than we're currently doing? The second aspect of that is to say, in regard to small business development, as practitioners in this field, let us reflect. Have our initiatives and programs been multidimensional enough to build competitive businesses, to build high capability, to ensure that they are sustainable and they can continue to be catalysts for growing jobs. That's really, for me, are two fundamental questions that I'm really passionate about. And with my colleagues in the panel, I hope we're going to digest further and see what we can do collaboratively as stakeholders in the industry.
Yeah, and look, a lot needs to be done. And I don't want this to be an alarmist conversation. I want it to be a constructive one, but I think we've got the reality here that some very urgent interventions are needed. Farai, let me bring you in here as a lead partner campaigning for Yes for Youth. What are young entrepreneurs telling you are their biggest hurdles to success right now?
So, Joanne, we know that on the African continent, young people account for 60% of Africa's joblessness, highlighting that there are so many barriers for young people to be employed. And a huge trend we see not only in Africa, but within the South African context as well, is that young people find themselves in what you call the experience trap, where you can't get a job without work experience, and you can't get work experience without a job. And we know that these are multiple barriers that young people face, particularly for those who want to go into entrepreneurship. There's a lack of access to capital, to market, to training. And so something that has been so important for us to do at the Youth Employment Service is to say, how do we provide young people with that first work experience opportunity so that we can break that experience trap? And what YES does is to provide unemployed youth with a 12-month work experience opportunity. And to date, we've created over 55,000 of these work experience opportunities. And I think the beauty of this program is that young people don't only get on-the-job experience, which is paid for by a year across multiple industries ranging from education to agriculture to IT, but young people also have a smartphone preloaded with learning modules. And a core component of those learning modules are what we call Siyazakela, which is all about how do you run your own business? How do you identify a need within your community? And how do you look at what product or service you want? And I think what's been interesting is that through these modules, we're showing young people that running your own business doesn't mean you have to establish Microsoft in a day, because that's the perception people have when it comes to entrepreneurship. Running your own business means identifying a need you have in your community and looking at whether you need a product or a service, looking at who's currently within the scope, within the field, how you can partner with them, how are your revenues sustainable, and ultimately, particularly for the African context, pushing this idea of social entrepreneurship. How do you have a product or service that is able to contribute positively to the socioeconomic status of your community? So I'm looking forward to us engaging further here. And I know a lot of the panelists do this work in any case. And ultimately, what I'd love to get out of this is how we build an ecosystem with all of us involved and other organizations, and how we all as South Africans play our part in ensuring that youth unemployment is a term of the past.
That's such an important question, Farai. And of course, Henry, I've never thought of the V&A waterfront, aside from being a shopping destination, as being one of those youth solutions providers in the country. How do you go about supporting the over 400 youth-owned SMEs I hear are operating from that location?
Good morning, Joanne. Good morning to all the participants and viewers. I want to touch on something that Farai left off with around the ecosystem and joining the dots. One of the biggest challenges we're seeing that entrepreneurs are facing, we know market access, compliance, access to capital are some of the standard challenges that entrepreneurs face from all walks of life. But something that particularly has been evident due to the COVID-19 outbreak is building networks and getting access to information. Prior, we would utilize a lot of the infrastructure that we have across our precinct to sort of bring entrepreneurs from various different sectors together, give them access to funders, give them access to training opportunities. And that's become so much harder due to COVID-19. We've needed to shift to a digital/hybrid space, and giving small businesses access to those resources has become so much harder, particularly looking at the challenges that we face with regards to data costs. Across the continent, data is much cheaper and much more accessible. We've heard of many service providers partnering up with education service providers to bring them access to these skills development opportunities. But it also becomes so much harder for us to build these networks. Joining the dots is central to our philosophy to create opportunity for small businesses. We're needing to provide SMEs with a lot more mentorship and coaching, and that's needing to be taking place through an online medium, which often has its challenges. But entrepreneurs are sitting there out in the cold, facing a lot of self-doubt as a young entrepreneur, not always having access to a mentor to soundboard various different ideas. They're also facing an age stereotypical challenge where in certain sectors they aren't being taken seriously. We know that this might not be the case, for instance, in the creative industry, where we see marketing departments leaning into sort of young creatives, but in value-adding sectors such as mining, construction, etc., we're seeing a lot of this age stereotype taking place where particularly procurement managers aren't giving young entrepreneurs opportunity at the startup phase.
That's such an important point, and I want to come back to that a little bit later on in our conversation. Henry, just tell me, are there particular challenges, make this distinction for me, are there particular challenges which youth entrepreneurs face which don't really affect other small business owners in the same way? And do you have to kind of adapt your model for those youth entrepreneurs to succeed?
Yeah. So I'll mention two challenges that youth entrepreneurs face specifically. Firstly, you're starting a business in a country where there's often a lack of infrastructure, access to data. Also, as a young entrepreneur, you generally don't have access to capital. And even though this is true to all entrepreneurs, it's specifically true to a young entrepreneur who generally doesn't have access to savings, access to retirement, and then without that backing of access to capital, are facing it harder and harder to utilize loss of capital for leverage to access financing, etc. So we're finding the basic need of access to capital to scale a business as a large challenge. Another one is this challenge around, the challenging market downturn that we're facing. Young entrepreneurs generally do not have the experience that a more experienced or older entrepreneur have to weather the storm. So it's really up to us as private sector and government to create a sort of safer barrier and cushion for small businesses that are youth-owned to survive this COVID-19 pandemic.
But Matebe, I know Telkom also has several initiatives on the go to develop and support youth entrepreneurs like Future Makers, for example. What are you finding are the main stumbling blocks preventing them from getting their new businesses off the ground in your experience?
Good morning, Joanne, and good morning to your listeners and the audience joining us. I think before I start to talk about Future Makers, I want to touch on the concept of the entrepreneurial ecosystem within South Africa. So one of the main things that I believe South Africa's entrepreneurial efforts are failing, I think it's because it has a very mixed approach to developing entrepreneurs. So for example, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which is the GEM report, a very reputable longitudinal study that studies entrepreneurship ecosystems across the world, has ranked South Africa 49th out of 54 countries, right? Ahead of only Croatia, Guatemala, Paraguay, and Iran, right? So war-stricken countries. And so with all the resources that we have, with all the government programs that we have, with all the supplier development programs that we have, I feel like the fundamental thing that's leading us to fail and be in this position is the mixed approach of saying we're developing small businesses as well as entrepreneurs. And I think that there's a clear distinction between what an entrepreneurial venture looks like and the policies required to nurture that venture, as well as a small business and the nurturing of that. And so when we talk about youth challenges, I think we need to be very realistic in terms of how we solve them through business and through entrepreneurship. Firstly, entrepreneurship is quite a difficult journey that does require really high-end type of skills, problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, and requires an ecosystem that nurtures innovation, research, nurtures transfer of knowledge, nurtures communities of best practice, and result in businesses that are global and not just local. Whereas small businesses, and in fact, there's a scholar, a researcher who really worked tirelessly in Israel to develop that ecosystem called Daniel Eisenberg. He goes as far as to say that we should actually be thinking about small businesses as part of social development, right? Social development and not necessarily economic development. And I think therein lies in the segue into what then must be done and how then do we approach this. So, for example, when we talk about access to capital as a component of the entrepreneurship ecosystem, we need to probably differentiate between microcredit that is necessary, and definitely small businesses are necessary for survival and for feeding families. And then we need to think about patient capital and entrepreneurial finance that is necessary for the growth of entrepreneurial ventures. And so then for me, then the challenges in terms of how then do we move forward with preparing the youth for this. I mean, Jem highlights a very fundamental thing which is important for entrepreneurship, which is the intention to start a business, right? And the believing that you can actually run a successful business that scales globally. And South Africa has a really high fear of failure, right? So for me, the first step of solving that problem is to work on the mindset. To work on the mindset and to make sure that we're taking entrepreneurs on a journey of discovery that is structured with the right skills and with the right experimentation. And that's why we've started the Township Innovation Incubator at Telkom Future Makers, because part of that is really to start working on the mindset, looking at real clear problems, understanding their scalability, understanding your customer, and understanding their use cases and validating it not just based on your current community, but also in terms of any other global practices or global scaling initiatives, or rather global scaling markets. Whereas with small businesses, there are programs to support that, and that is primarily to make sure that you link those small businesses to how to manage their businesses a lot better, how to manage their finances a lot better, such that they stay sustainable in their context, while at the same time trying to work on the mindset. So just to summarize that, and I think our approach has really been to differentiate between an entrepreneurial high growth venture versus a small business. And I think in South Africa, we definitely need both. We do have an informal market, but I think the priority with the limited resources that we have should actually be, to think about what are those things that need to be in place to enable high growth enterprises to scale, and such that when they do scale, they provide what we call spillover effects. And spillover effects, as I mentioned, Daniel Eisenberg talks about how, by creating a high growth enterprise, you're able then to create a community of small businesses around that. So if you think about, for example, let's just take Uber as an example. So part of it is to create a community of these small owner-driver businesses that really are there to make sure that they solve the hunger challenge, they solve the clear social economic development challenges. But at the same time, you do need an environment that really nurtures the likes of Uber. So you need a regulatory environment that is friendly to that. You need access to capital that is friendly to that. And when you look at what we are doing in South Africa, when we start to see these platform businesses, we're either quite hostile towards them from a regulatory perspective, we're either wanting it to be equitably distributed. And I think that becomes a challenge. And that really, for me, is an assessment of an analysis, or rather, why we are 49 out of 54 countries from a national entrepreneurship context perspective. So we actually have to prioritize when we say we want to develop the youth. In which direction are we developing the youth? What are the real skills that we want to give the youth? We should be focusing on problem-solving skills. We should be focusing on critical thinking skills, and definitely our education is failing us. And part of that that we've taken on is to make sure that we really nurture the thinking journey a lot better.
Yeah. Matebe, you make so much sense, such density to what you've said there. And Kino, what comes across to me is the fact that we are not entrenching the skills that kids need, number one, even at a school level, because it seems to me, yes, we're hearing whisperings of that being integrated into the education system. It's going to take a while for the curriculum to be designed. We don't have time on our side, but also we're just simply not agile enough as a country. We fear the kind of change that Matebe has spoken about, instead of embracing it with the kind of legislation and a business environment that is conducive to allowing businesses like Uber, for example, to prosper.
Absolutely. So a lot's been said today around this, and I just have to tell you, from my perspective, so I sit on the board of TIBA Business School, where we've been having some tough discussions around this as well. Are we only going to be looking after the NQF? People with their NQF qualifications, are we going to be expanding our reach a lot broader, which we are busy doing at the moment. But from an educational perspective, Joanne, I couldn't agree more. We've got dinosaurs running the education department, and dinosaurs move very slowly, right? By the time they've pivoted and done what they should have done, the technology is long gone. Double exponential growth in technology. So what we are seeing at the moment is we're seeing smaller private entities like the Valencia Institute, for example, such as universities starting their own schools to bring their own skills flow through so that they can get them university ready. And these are the sort of things I think we're going to be seeing more of, and we should be seeing more of. I've got lots of respect for the hard work that Angie Macheka, for example, has ahead of her, but with her administration being as top-heavy as it is, you have to have committee meetings about committee meetings, talk to a union, then talk to the union members, another before you can actually make a difference. We are never going to get there as quickly as we should. That's just from an educational perspective, right? Even at university level, what are we doing? We front-load people with education. We give them 3 years to go and study whatever it is that they're studying, and then we throw them into the real world. How about actually integrating more effectively, just the way techs used to, actual physical work that university graduates have to be part of from the get-go, so that they can actually mix, the theoretical with the practical. And finally, the reason I got off radio was because I'm sick and tired of having long discussions about what needs to be done. Year in and year out, we chat to ministers, we chat to this person and corporates, and they all got very good ideas, but very little happens. So what we've done is, at KKI, we've essentially created a platform that connects corporates, big corporates, to the SMEs in the clustered communities around in which they operate, for example. So take a Spur Group. I disagree that we shouldn't. I totally disagree that we should say micro enterprises or smaller SMEs must be boxed over here. A good example, I spoke to a bank CEO not too long ago, and I said to him, listen, if I brought a guy from Danone to you, and he takes tires and he makes little minion seats, right? And he says to you, I need a loan to take those minion seats and hopefully get it into a Spur Group. The bank's going to tell him to have a 4 million rand home before they can get finance. So he can't get access to finance. But if I connect him to the Spur Group, and Mike Bosman, the chairman of Spur, says, you know what, I'm happy to take this young man and those seats that he's created, we'll put it in our kiddies section and we'll try it out. And if we like it, we'll scale that to 3, 4, 5 Spurs. Then what we'll do is we'll take our ESD money to help that particular person grow and scale throughout the Spur Group and beyond. That is the sort of thing that we need to be looking at. And that is how I believe we're going to get things done at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's such a practical example. I mean, that access to market is a massive thing. What are some of, just give me like a couple of other the gaps that you see in your experience doing this on a daily basis that if you had a magic wand, you would try to fill immediately?
Listen, let's talk about township developments, right? Places burn down, we give people wood iron structures and we say put it back up, and we do very little. We also look at malls going into townships, for example, and the fact that some of those malls obliterate some of the businesses. I'm going, hold on, if there's a Pick and Pay, if there's a ShopRite, etc., in a particular neighborhood, why aren't we developing townships with business in mind? Why aren't we saying, how about How about your, I don't know, free-range chickens? How do we actually build some of these communities? They don't have to be townships, it could be any community, with enterprise in mind, linking them to the bigger corporates that have supply chains close by. And it's really, for me, about hyper-localized procurement. I am sick and tired of the centralized procurement nonsense, because I've had so many discussions with these procurement managers, and they're going, oh, it's difficult to deal with micro enterprises and SMEs because, we procure centrally. Rubbish, man. What you need to do is make sure that you empower your managers. Let's just take Spur Group, for example. They've got, what, Rockamama's, Spur, and a whole lot of other places. Why am I giving that contract to Bidvest to do the cleaning? Why? And this is the gap that I see. We need to move to more hyper-localized procurement. We need to empower our managers, train our managers at a hyper-local level. Doesn't mean we're going to sacrifice quality. We can manage all of that through monitoring and evaluating the way that service is delivered into the supply chain digitally. So that from my perspective is one of the most important gaps that I do see.
There is so much in what you've said as well. And I think, Trudy, you were probably in much the same boat as an entrepreneur starting out in 2016 with your company, Ambesha Africa. I mean, you've done very well. But tell me, from a very personal point of view, what kind of challenges you faced in starting out and getting this business off the ground without the kind of support that our panelists have already spoken about.
It's actually getting access to information. I think Henry mentioned that. Part of the challenge that I've experienced was actually getting access to information. You find, your government and private institution having this good, this good initiatives that are there to help small businesses.
Yeah.
But sometimes some of them, they hide the information. So you need to know someone in order for you to access that information and benefit from all the initiatives that are there that are supposed to also benefit us as a small business.
Yeah.
So those were the biggest challenges that I actually experienced when starting a business. Yeah.
Yeah. So the infrastructure was there, the organizations were there, but they weren't exactly serving your needs in the way they ought to have, Trudy.
No, they were not. Yeah.
In what areas could they have done better?
I think to actually open up doors for us. For instance, I've had like government supporting me, backing up to go to access big markets, like, with your retailers.
Yes.
Even with the government backup, the retailers were not willing to open up the doors. They will tell you that, no, we have contracts with other companies for 10 years. Even I've tried to actually offer products that appreciates what they already have, but it seems as if they were not actually willing to take up a small business. And I think when I read, you actually get to understand that sometimes it's not easy to really access the market. Take, for instance, you go to your malls, the big companies, they have lists of up to 25 years of exclusivity.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't even give a chance to actually access the market that they are serving. And we are capable. Like I say, take for instance, give me a small scale. Like I've targeted businesses understanding my capacity, and I've offered them what I could actually give to them realistically.
Yeah.
And they were not interested,
How do you go about, before we talk about the lack of interest, how do you go about even locating those businesses? Is that an easy thing to do, Trudy?
It's not an easy thing to do. Like he said, most of them, they will tell you they're centralized, they're not, because how I started locally, you target your local retailers and then thinking that you can supply locally before you can go nationally.
Yes, which makes complete sense.
Yes, so when you go locally, they tell you we are central and, they'll give you the head office story. It's our head office that makes but you finally get to secure that meeting, and then they just do it sometimes I feel like they do it for ticking the boxes that we did meet this small business and we're not going to help you. Yeah.
Yeah. Truly, it must be very discouraging. I mean, the spirit of an entrepreneur has got to be one of great resilience through all of these things. Panellists, I've got 100 questions for you, just stemming from the kinds of things that our previous guests have said. But I want to start with this issue of access to market. There is a reality here. Let's start off with the lack of faith in young entrepreneurs, right? They don't have a track record, to be fair. One doesn't know whether this business is going to collapse within the space of 6 months or a year, or whether the business owner, for example, has the resilience to keep going. What would persuade a corporate to say, okay, I'm going to do away with one of my previous suppliers who is a reliable character, and I'm going to replace him with Trudy?
Yeah. I think we have to acknowledge, just to echo some of the sentiments that my colleagues have shared. The first issue, I think Henry touched on that. The issue of management infrastructure is very critical. And I think corporate South Africa is responding and has tried to respond in terms of putting system, tools, and templates in place to ensure that there is infrastructure for people to do business. However, we know that the need is big, the need is great. And I believe fundamentally, as one of the first key contribution that corporate South Africa can make is really to scale up this issue of management infrastructure. We know in our country, as we're sitting here in studio right now, if you really look at internet penetration, such a fundamental, such a basic issue, we're lagging behind many, many other countries just in regard to access to that information. But the second issue is, I think, the issue of mindsets and behaviors and capability, both internal and external, is very, very important. My colleagues were just sharing, and I think through this echoing the sentiment that you can have all these initiatives in place, but if the organizational culture and values are not dealt with internally to align into the agenda of supplier diversity, it becomes even more challenging. It's challenging already as it is. When you talk about access to markets holistically, I referred in my earlier comment to a multi-dimensional approach. And I think one of our panelists touched on that issue. I think that corporate South Africa has the buying power to influence how the market goes and how it should go. In terms of ensuring that there is access to market, there's been a lot of things that we have tried in the past. We have set aside purchase orders for small businesses. We have done a lot of things. But for me, importantly, I think where the fundamental issue resides is that there is such a big disconnect between the work that we do pre-contract and the work that we do post-contract. As a corporate, things such as funding and some of the matters that we've already dealt with that are pre-contract, there's been a bit of change, there's been a bit of movement, but it's not enough. But in order to mitigate that risk, the issue of having an ecosystem that will bring an entrepreneur with the right level of support to demonstrate that this business goes and far and beyond just technical capability, but it can be sustainable, is the issue that I think is very fundamental for the appetite of the corporate to change and start to show more faith towards small businesses. I believe a lot of what we have done has been around training and more training and more training. What we have not been able to do is to harness the power of our corporate clients, the power of our buying power, the power of all the other stakeholders to come up with a full proposition that it's not just around the business concept itself, but it goes far and beyond that. It's an issue of sustainability, it's an issue of presenting strong organizations. And where there is gaps, there is a very clear growth plan and an understanding of how such risks can be mitigated. I believe fundamentally that we do have all the pieces in place, but the issue of how to put that ecosystem together to work in a way that all stakeholders derive equal value out of the initiatives is really the issue for me.
Yeah. I'm trying to imagine from a corporate point of view how this culture of helping small businesses along, particularly youth businesses, can be encouraged. One doesn't want to legislate to force corporates to do this, right? You would rather that the change in culture occurred and there was a deeper appreciation as a matter of conscience for what you need to do for young people at this point. But how does one deal with the reality of your existing 25-year leases with the large companies, getting corporate managers to think that actually it's not just my business to train these individuals, these young entrepreneurs, it's my business to train them, to try and give them access to market, and to try to give them the support and build the resilience into them that I need in order to benefit my business without disadvantaging my current imperatives.
Yeah. It's a tricky balance. It is a tricky balance, and we have to acknowledge that. But I think to answer your question more directly, as I've referred, we have the buying power as corporates. We set the tone, we set the strategy. What is important here is to understand that this is not an issue of displacements, moving certain suppliers on the side to bring in other suppliers. This is a commercial imperatives. For me, it's not just a question of we are bringing an empowered supplier into the value chain. It's a question of there's actually a commercial proposition that comes through with using a supplier that is smaller. There is a lot of work, and I think a lot of my panelists will agree, and a lot of research has shown that if you talk about speed, if you talk about local presence, if you talk about innovation, smaller businesses have showed to be a little bit more agile, and they can derive a lot of that value for you in the value chain. What it is for me in regard to some long-standing suppliers, it's our ability as the corporate to work in partnership with these suppliers. And it's very difficult to find like-minded organizations to work with. But for me, it's around how do I work with my current supplier to develop a supplier of the future in such a way that there is a mutually beneficial relationship that can arise from that engagement. What we have seen in particular, as we've gone through that journey, we're finding that more and more of our long-standing suppliers are willing to work with us to develop smaller suppliers.
Interesting.
Where the issue lies in is who does what in this particular relationship. How do you shape this relationship? I think for me that is really where we are in terms of that evolution, in terms of finding the right partnership model that works for all the stakeholders on the table.
Sure. Farai, you're a pretty busy person. I mean, you're involved with Africa Tikkun. You're the founder of Africa Matters, which promotes social entrepreneurship, the Harambee Hustle, and sayouth.mobi, which we know is an initiative of the president to build sustainable businesses. When we listen to everything that our panelists have told us, are the powers that be within these organizations actually grappling with the most important issues, the most pertinent issues in building these youth businesses? Or is there a sense that, okay, we're going to do this as a sort of top-down approach, this is what we think you need right now?
You know, Joanne, I think that we have to understand that where we find ourselves in, not only continentally, but in South Africa in particular, is that we are in an unemployment crisis. In fact, we are in the thick of the unemployment crisis. And we know that SME development and job creation are definitely linked. And so there's definitely an understanding of this amongst the different partners we have. For where we find ourselves in, and with the release of our unemployment stats about 2 weeks ago, young people in our country are feeling very hopeless, we're feeling very disillusioned. And I think the approach we have to have now is to say, how do we change this narrative? How do those of us who work in such organizations, who work in the private sector, create a sense of hope within our country? How are we optimistic in what we can do for the future of our country? And I think we have definitely seen that it's no longer business as usual. There's a realization from private sector, and we've heard some panelists talking today about that. There's a realization from NGOs and civil society that we have to get this work done. And I think yesterday is a prime example of how there's this realization that we're in the thick of the crisis and we have to work together. Just yesterday, President Ramaphosa launched the sayouth.mobi platform. That for me is such a powerful platform because it, number one, shows that we are no longer working in silos to combat youth unemployment. Number two, it shows that Let us centralize learning and earning opportunities for young people onto one platform. And let's show young people, let's expose them to information. And Trudy spoke about this, that there's a lack of information for young people who want to start their own businesses. And what the SA Youth platform does is to show young people that here are different pathways for your own development and your own career. You can either run your own business, and this is the organization that can assist you with that. You can gain work experience to be permanently employed. Here's what will assist you. Or you can pursue your studies, and here's a channel. And within the South African context, we have a lot of information asymmetries between what young people think the market wants and between what market actually wants and what market can do in terms of the provision of jobs. So SA Youth is really exciting. And my hope is that corporates who are watching this right now sign up to this platform, place opportunities on there, not only for employment, but also to support youth-owned businesses. A number of partners we've got on this platform are Yes, with the 55,000 work experience opportunities. Harambee has got the hustle economy, which is promoting and encouraging young people to also look at gig work and gig jobs. And already on the platform, there's 1.5 million job seekers. Africa Tikkun has got an incredible model that shows that you can build the skills that you need from cradle to career. Africa Matters promotes social entrepreneurship, and we operate in 5 different African countries. And the NYDA is also a big supporter and a big contributor of this platform. So I think for where I am within this ecosystem, I'm quite optimistic because I understand that, yes, when the president launched the 5x5 plan to combat youth unemployment a few years ago, the creation of SMEs, particularly youth-owned SMEs, was a big factor. And when COVID hit, a lot of the stimulus package for employment was cut in order to redistribute resources to COVID-19. But I think yesterday's launch signifies that, hey, here is a realization that we all have to play our part. And here is a realization of different pathways to do that. So I'm really optimistic on the South African scale. On the continental scale, I think what's really exciting, and perhaps what we're missing in the conversation, is that on the 1st of Jan this year, the Continental Free Trade Agreement was put into place and was ratified. We now have 32, if I'm not mistaken, 34 African countries who have ratified this agreement. Now, what does this mean for Africa? This means that there's an increase in access to skills, access to opportunities, access to employment, access to SMEs. We've got Africans working together instead of continuing our historical ways of wanting to get our produce and our products or services externally. This agreement encourages us to trade with one another because it also removes those barriers of trade. And I think what's exciting about that is that we've got numerous organizations and initiatives since this agreement was ratified who have created opportunities for SMEs to grow. The African Union has got a number of youth-focused initiatives to encourage young people to create jobs. The African Development Bank has got thousands of opportunities for young people to create jobs and to support them with access to capital, to market, to training. At the African Leadership Academy, each student that leaves has to create 300 jobs. You're tasked with that as a result of attending the academy. And I think that is so powerful because we know SMEs are drivers of economic growth and decreasing unemployment rates. And in South Africa, if we look at our stats, SMEs contribute to about 26% of our GDP. And we've got an overall unemployment rate of about 32.6%. In the US, SMEs contribute to about 65% of GDP, and they have an unemployment rate of 6%. And those two stats just show us the power of really driving youth-owned businesses, driving SMEs, so that we can combat this unemployment beast. And I think from where I'm sitting, looking at this ecosystem, looking at the different role players, while we are definitely in this time of young people feeling hopeless about their future, I definitely think we've never been much better positioned as private sector, as government, as NGOs to work together to make unemployment a thing of the past.
I mean, that collaboration issue is a huge one, Farai. But I also want to ask you, I mean, you've spoken about the very pointed interventions that have been made via these conduits that have been created. When we juxtapose that with the imperatives of creating this number of jobs, 8 million jobs, which we will have to do almost literally overnight, do those initiatives match up with the demand that's out there?
I mean, we definitely have the issue in South Africa where the supply outweighs the demand. But I do think that is changing. And I think that we definitely saw that COVID-19 had a drastic impact on the number of businesses and organizations that were able to create these necessary jobs. But post-COVID-19, and as we're seeing the economy opening up a bit more, even just from a yes perspective, we've now got over 1,500 corporate sign-ups, which means corporates are still saying, we want to create jobs, we want to have an impact within the society. I do think the other realization that we have to have is that with our labor market as it stands, jobs won't come from corporates, jobs won't come from governments, jobs have to come from SMEs. Yeah. And so conversations like this in terms of how we drive SMEs are absolutely important and critical. And my hope is that the more we work together, the more we realize SMEs as a driving force for job creation, the more we can see more young people with access, with capital, with support that they need to be able to employ even more. So I think that, I'm definitely expecting to see an increase within the demand side, because the fact that we've got 1.5 million job seekers on the platform, on SA Youth, waiting for opportunities, means we have to provide them with those opportunities. And my hope is that yesterday's launch will catapult corporates, will catapult organizations to say, here is the crisis we're facing, let us show up, because it's no longer business as usual.
Yeah. Henry, you're chair of the South African chapter of the Shared Value Initiative, and you're connecting with a lot of small businesses across Africa. I'm curious to know, are other small businesses belonging to young people struggling just as much as they are in South Africa? Or is there some kind of support system that we could potentially adopt here in South Africa?
Yeah, I think small businesses across the continent are facing similar challenges that we've mentioned here today, lack of infrastructure, both, I think, hard and soft, access to funding instruments. I'm seeing a lot of financing, less grant funding, less mentorship and access to skills development opportunities through funding. I think there's one good example. I saw the Digital Africa Fund was released in about 2018, 2019, which focuses specifically much more on grant funding and access to mentorship and skills development opportunities rather than straight out funding at a marginal percentage rate. So we're seeing those challenges, but there are major opportunity as well, Joanne. And I'm very happy that Farai brought up the Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's currently a major focus for us at the Shared Value Africa Initiative South African Working Group, particularly building bridges between market access points in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Rwanda, in South Africa, and building better collaboration between not only multinational corporations working in those countries, but also corporates and small businesses in the various communities. I think, interestingly, though, across the continent, there's much greater aptitude for entrepreneurship. In South Africa, there's generally, as mentioned earlier, a slight aversion to risk. And businesses wanting to venture out. Small businesses, for instance, that are youth-owned, not wanting to venture out and take the risk of starting a small business. But there is really opportunity in particularly solving some of the challenges that society and the environment faces. And in solving the opportunities around the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, there's real market opportunity for youth-owned small businesses. I like what Panellists mentioned earlier, building suppliers of the future. I think lastly from my side, what I'd like to add is I maybe want to use an example of what we experienced at the V&A waterfront during COVID, and taking perhaps a learning out of that when we're looking at Africa as a continent. We are the number one destination across the continent. We've got approximately 26 million visitors that visit the V&A waterfront each year. We sit on the market end. We sit right at the back end of the value chain. 400 small businesses, 800 different tenants. And in 2020, that market came crashing down. And all of a sudden, we needed to understand very clearly who our small businesses are, who the market is that they serve, and how we best, in a very agile manner, gear them towards continuing to serve that market. So ease of business and agility was key to that approach. So we put a number of measures in place, but we leaned on our ecosystem. We leaned on our partners, both big and small across our precinct, academic institutions, big businesses, small businesses. A challenge that we suddenly saw was that many businesses were compliant. Registered the simple five-point check, not registered with the tax, with SARS, not registered with CIPC. And what that meant is that all the support mechanisms that were out there, TERS, funding from the Loan Bank Guarantee Scheme, were not accessible to these small businesses. And the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement will be fantastic if businesses are able to comply with it and have access to the information and the support to make use of that additional market opportunities across the continent. Currently, and we were hoping that this would be solved by now, but the continent in itself, and I suppose globally, there's a massive challenge with regards to steel manufacturing. And this is, if you particularly look at some of the opportunity around energy, around solving for solar and solving for wind, steel is a major component. We are the sixth biggest producer of iron ore in the globe. Yet we are still importing iron ore from across the globe. If we focus much more on value-added sectors, manufacturing and processing, so we're sourcing across the continent for some of these sustainable development goals and opportunities that live within them, we stand a better chance of creating those 8 million jobs that you spoke of earlier.
Yeah, I want to take some questions from our audience. We've got some really good questions, and I'm going to ask you in this round to just keep your answers as brief as possible because we are up against the clock now. Let me start with you, Matebe. Kathy Hurley has asked an interesting question. A number of initiatives, she says, focus on the training and incubation of entrepreneurs, but very few explain how these mini businesses will fund their activities. We need a microfinancing mechanism for limited funding that can kickstart thousands of businesses, especially in rural areas. And I think that is a very important market that we need to look at, is it not, Matebe?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the points I made earlier around having clarity in terms of what is the outcome that you want in terms of supporting small businesses starts to answer that. So all of the stuff that the panelists have said in terms of creating new suppliers of the future, entering new markets, means that at the end of the day, you have to tailor make support to align to that. So, for example, if a certain business is trying to enter a health, the health market, then you need to tailor finance such that it is soft enough to carry that business right from the ideation space, right? So you need to figure out what are the different points and how much funding is going to be relevant within that industry and within that market, such that that business is able to go from ideation all the way to commercialization, all the way to scaling and growing. And I think part of the issues that we have in the country is that we are almost not tailoring finance to meet those needs in incubation programs. So we don't have a sense of how much funding is required at an ideation stage and what kind of funding. So, for example, giving loans or microloans to a business that's trying to develop a new health device is probably not a great idea at seed stage. So you probably want to start off thinking about soft finance, grant finance, and later on equity finance that starts to lead to that business achieving the milestones it needs to achieve in that market. On the issue of microcredit, microcredit is quite an interesting concept because essentially, so Mohammed Yunus started microcredit, and the whole idea was that informal traders would be able to get access to credit. So I think, in solving the financial inclusion component, it's very useful in that sense. But I think to expect that offering 1,000 microcredit loans to 1,000 small businesses is probably not going to necessarily lead to the high growth and the scalability that we want. So that's where the clarification is so important in terms of when you think about incubation support programs, what is it that you're trying to achieve and what is the outcome that you want to see in the end? I don't know if that answers the question, Joanne.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you very much for that, Matebe. Quick one for you, Farai, from Spongile. She says, my question is for Farai. Jobs won't come from, you say, jobs won't come from government nor big corporate, but they will come from small businesses. How can this practically be possible, given that they have to operate in stifling regulatory environments, in which most cases have a negative impact on their survival, rather? So essentially, she's looking at the reality of red tape strangulating potential small businesses that youth are trying to get going. All right?
Yeah, and I think, Joanne, that's a really, really important question, because when we look at, what is the reality at the moment of the labor market, that's what it's showing us, that there's only so many jobs your corporates can provide, only so many jobs your government can provide, but that the majority of these jobs have to come from SMEs. And I must say, I think that the work which we're doing with the Presidential Youth Employment Program is looking at this. It's looking at saying these are the pathways for young people to be employed. These are the pathways for young people to be running their own businesses. How do we then reanalyze certain systems? How do we reanalyze what's working and what is not working? And I must say, it's been really interesting to see in these sessions and discussions we're having with presidency, where we're analyzing what is the red tape and how do we remove that red tape. And more than that, if young businesses are complaining about access, which is a major factor, major barrier to them being able to scale up, as Matebe had said, how do we then create pools where they can have access to funding, access to market, access to training? And I think the different role players we have and the stakeholders who are involved in these conversations are definitely serious about removing these barriers. And I think the SA Youth Platform launched yesterday was a first step to showing that there are multiple pathways out there for young people. And the second step would be to say, great, we've got these pathways. How do we make sure they're truly all accessible for young people? And how do we remove any barriers that young people will face as they embark on these pathways?
Thank you for that, Farai. I'm actually going to wrap up with you, Trudy, because I know that this journey has been a very emotional one for you, but a massive learning curve for you at the same time. And I want you to talk to something that has come up in the discussion intermittently, and that is the spirit of an entrepreneur. There are many young people out there who know they don't have the education, perhaps. They don't have the critical thinking skills required to start a business, but they've got that entrepreneurial spirit. They've got that inclination to take a risk and to foresee that there may be incredible rewards. And there's a particular temperament that people like you who are able to do that have. The rest of us go and work for someone else, right? because that's comfort zone that we like to remain in. But I want to ask you about that, and I want you to talk to young people as we wrap up, please, or perhaps their parents or caregivers or friends who are listening. How do you cultivate that desire as a young person in a country where the odds are often stacked against you? How do you cultivate that desire to keep going, the resilience to stay the course, to become a young entrepreneur?
I think for me, it depends on how hungry you are about a particular thing. So for me, my passion for my business is big. And what it means for me to be a youth entrepreneur, it's like I had to overcome all the fears that comes with starting your own business and everything that has to overcoming all these challenges. Like when other people sees failure, you have to find something and identify opportunities to solve a problem to your community or to your country. So I think for us as small businesses, as much as it's difficult, for instance, I've been looking to get access to the market, and I'm still hopeful. I'm still hopeful, and I say to young entrepreneurs that if you cannot get through to the door, you have to go parallel with what they're doing, because that is the whole point. If they're not accepting you in, you have to do what they're doing, but you do it outside, and then let your products prove to your clients. I think let your product or whatever you're offering speak to your client, because you'll get very discouraged. They are I think maybe it comes with starting a business and the mentality from from your big retailers that we are small and we're not capable enough, and like the regulations as well, we is the same as a big business. As small as we are, we need to be compliant as if we are the big business, and which some of the compliant, it requires a lot of money, like corridor, you need to pay for them. So it's sometimes it gets discouraging, but I think you just need to focus on whatever that you want to achieve, and don't let distractions focus. And yeah, one day I think eventually your product or your service will be recognized, because some they like to be associated once you've already established, but when you are on the foundation, it gets not easy for them to associate, with other businesses. But I think out of everything, try and research a lot, because sometimes information won't come to you, but there's help that is available out there. There's like companies that with great initiative, good intentions, but the distance between us and accessing it, it's the lack of the information.
So you've got to be proactive.
Yes, you need to go out there. If it doesn't come to you, go out there, look for those information, because they are available. And yeah.
Trudy, thank you so much. That is an inspiring note on which to end. I mean, these are conversations sometimes that make you feel a little like there is a mountain ahead to climb. But difficult as that sounds, it's been done hundreds of times with the combination of knowledge, will, and fortitude, as well as collaboration, the kind we've spoken about today. And it looks like these are some of the skills we'll need to ensure our youth are heard and supported, and they access the future they deserve. Let's keep thinking, let's keep talking, and doing everything about it we can. On that note, I'll wrap up our conversation for today. If you need to refer back to any of the information we've covered, you can watch a recording of our discussion on YouTube and Business Day TV. Don't forget, the entries for 2021 have opened, and companies can go to www.sdawards.co.za to enter. Thank you to our panel members for your insights. Really fantastic having you all with us. And thank you for watching and participating in the live chat. Many thanks to ABSA for partnering with Business Day Dialogues to highlight this pivotal issue. We'll be back with you next month to take these important discussions forward. I'll see you then. From me, Joanne Joseph, take care and keep safe out there. Bye-bye.